Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Center for Buddhist Studies of University of Hong Kong for inviting me to this conference. I'll turn off my video and present my paper. Anyway, so we can focus on the presentation. My paper is titled Shaping the Order of Ritualized Community in Medieval Chinese Buddhist Monasticism. I will discuss one of the key writings of Dao Xuan, very important medieval Chinese Buddhist masters. Dao Xuan was one of the most important Buddhist scholarly monks in medieval China. His prolific writings provide significant sources for our understanding of Buddhist history in his era. Contemporary scholarship has produced numerous monographs and articles on his writings. This paper will focus on one of his key writings, Methods of Admonition and Contemplating for Purifying Mind, 进行戒观法, for looking into his Buddhist thoughts and their implications to the Buddhist history. As I have discussed in my previous book, The Revival of Buddhist Monasticism in Medieval China, I argue that Dao Xuan figured out that the challenges the Buddhist community faced, and he presented his solutions by reforming many rules and regulations and institutions for reviving Buddhist monasticism for his community. And his work, Methods of Admonition and Contemplating for Purifying Mind, was one of the key texts for laying out these kind of solutions. This text reflects Dao Xuan's understanding of Buddhist doctrinal principles, ethics, morality, rituals, and cultivation methods. It's unclear exactly when Dao Xuan wrote the Methods of Admonition and Contemplating for Purifying Mind. However, it seems that Dao Xuan wrote it when he was practicing summer retreat in the Xintang Temple, Xintang Qielan, in Suizhou, modern Jiexiu, Shanxi province. After he finished his text, he privately transmitted this text to his close disciple Ciren for teaching newly ordained monks, self-cultivation, and also benefiting others by practicing the way of Bodhisattva. This work has 2 scrolls or Yuen, consisting of 30 chapters. According to Dao Xuan's notes, the first 25 chapters focus on various principles and the methods of self-cultivation for purifying the mind. And the last 5 chapters teach how to benefit others for serving as the Mahayana teaching. The title of this text has a phrase called 戒观, admonition and contemplating. And Dao Xuan actually explains that admonition refers to teaching the practitioners to understand the entry-level method for treating polluted minds and evil karmas. It also means cultivating and practicing the way for detaching from faults and problems. And contemplating means observing if this method is compatible with the Buddhist teaching or not. Historically speaking, Dao Xuan's contemporaries did not use this term. I traced the origin of this term back to the work of Huaiyu, who claimed that the Arhat could use this wisdom of heavenly eyes to admonish and contemplate how to enter the nirvana after the death. The term admonition and contemplating and the phrase heavenly eyes also appeared in Dao Xuan's work, Methods of Admonition and Contemplating. Dao Xuan might have also borrowed this term from Huaiyu because Huaiyu was a very important monk, a prominent monk and a crucial reformer of monastic institutions in the southern dynasties. In the meantime, I also suggest that Dao Xuan's text benefits the format of a text titled Method of Pure Conduct for the Disciple Abiding in Purity, 进柱子进行法门 by 萧子良, also in the Liang dynasty. Dao Xuan was an admirer of Xiao Ziliang, even though Xiao Ziliang was a lay person. Dao Xuan praised Xiao as a mountain of wisdom for his devotion to Buddhism and also his contribution to interpreting Buddhist texts and writing commentaries. Basically, because I already suggested earlier in my previous work, Dao Xuan promoted so-called the Southern tradition of Chinese Buddhism. So he definitely benefited from the institutions and the methods that were developed by the monks and the lay people in the Southern dynasties. And my current paper will first explain the historical background and the Buddhist context in which this text appeared. Basically, many of Dao Xuan's texts, including this text, display reflexive nature. Dao Xuan provided his unique observations of Buddhism in his era, and often briefly offered his criticisms against his contemporary Buddhist peers. But his objective was to lay out his own solutions to reform the Buddhist institutions. And secondly, I will introduce some crucial doctrines in this text and explain their ethical and moral implications to Dao Xuan's ambivalent plan for changing the Buddhist or for reforming the Buddhist community. Dao Xuan was a reformer to a great extent, but at some point he also held strong opinions on preserving Buddhist traditions. So he often took a conservative approach in some areas. Anyway, we'll take a look at the challenges, the opportunities Dao Xuan faced in his era. It's very important to contextualize Dao Xuan's text, methods of admonition and contemplating, because this text was written for its particular purpose against its historical and religious background. When Dao Xuan wrote this text, he was a Buddhist monk practicing his summer retreat in a remote region. The temple where he resided was not located in an urban center, such as like Tang capital city, Chang'an or Luoyang. In other words, he was living in a marginal monastic community. However, this quiet and reclusive environment might offer him an opportunity of observing from a distance the challenges and the crises that his contemporary Buddhist monastic establishments faced. In Dao Xuan's eyes, the monastic community faced a lot of challenges. He noted that Buddhism was persecuted 3 times in the northern region. Besides the failing support of the lay community in North China, Dao Xuan also attributed the persecutions to the internal crises within the monastic order, which refers to the monks failing to follow a set of like rules and regulations, and also to observe precepts. So he promoted a sort of like Buddhist tradition in South China, kind of like supported by the popularity of ordaining like monks on the platform, following a set of strict protocols. And he conceptualized that this idea motivated him to reinvent the tradition of ordination rituals based on his design of ordination platform. I already discussed this in my previous scholarship. For him, a monastic community must be ritualized. All monastic members must follow a set of monastic rules and regulations and live a ritualized lifestyle to secure the monastic order's stability. Ordination ritual marks the first step for a monk to start his monastic career. Anyway, Traditionally, a Buddhist monastic member would focus on three areas of practice and cultivation, like precepts, jie, concentration, din, and wisdom, which was also called three learnings in Chinese Buddhism. Dao Xuan kind of like strongly criticized the phenomenon of his times that many masters, Buddhist masters, competed for preaching the Dharma, for accumulating like wealth and fame, rather than like self-discipline and self-cultivation for creating a spiritual environment for the monastic community. To my understanding, several issues seems to be rising in Dao Xuan's era. First challenge is the difference between the South Asian tradition of Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism. Buddhism flourished in China stronger than in South Asia in Dao Xuan's era. Some local traditions have appeared. Chinese Buddhists were confident than ever and even regarded China as the world center of Buddhism. So Dao Xuan must answer some calls for solutions in his writing. On the one hand, he followed some general principles and values of Buddhist system, deeply rooted in the Buddhist literature. On the other hand, he also had to respond to the new issues that are probably more pressing to the medieval Chinese Buddhist community. Second, though Buddhism already flourished across the empire in medieval China, there were still debates on the different doctrines and practices between Hinayana and Mahayana traditions. Unlike South Asia, even most regions of Central Asia, where mainstream tradition of Buddhism was dominant, in China, Mahayana tradition was the dominant tradition from the very beginning. However, in Dao Xuan's era, there were bias against the learning of monastic codes from his perspectives. Many monks downplayed the importance of learning monastic code, Lü, Vinayas, or observing precepts, and regarded learning like precepts as the focus of the Hinayana tradition. So Dao Xuan aimed at offering his reformative kind of like perspective on learning Vinayas and observing precepts. In method of admonishing and contemplating, Dao Xuan pointed out that many new monks did not build a solid foundation of learning precepts and concentration before they directly turned to learn about the doctrines of emptiness. He strongly criticized that in his era, some of his contemporary masters often attacked each other for their doctrinal arguments, praising themselves and undermining others. Anyway, so third, Dao Xuan was also concerned with the relations between master and the disciples within the Buddhist monastic community. He observed that in his era, many disciples were not self-disciplined once they entered the monastic order, which was why he emphasized the importance of following the traditional order of three learning areas. In Dao Xuan's methods of admonishing and contemplating, he posed himself as an ambivalent Buddhist figure, both in a conservative and reformative manners. On the one hand, he firmly held some traditional values and principles based on conventional monastic order. On the other hand, Dao Xuan attempted to make these principles compatible with his contemporary Chinese Buddhist monastic community by introducing new methods. So I'll focus on these two areas. First, Dao Xuan as a conservative master and his principles. In Dao Xuan's text, he points out that many essential Buddhist moral principles and values should be obeyed and followed. From a comparative perspective with medieval Christianity, Dao Xuan's text seems to highlight four great principles. Here, we can see like austerity, chastity, and humility, and honesty. These principles governed the ethical and moral legitimation of the Buddhist monastic community and became the cornerstones of medieval Buddhist monasticism. And all these principles could be realized by purifying the mind through practicing concentration, according to Dao Xuan. First of all, he claimed that austerity and chastity were fundamental values of new monks. Especially in the chapter 2 of his methods of admonishing and contemplating. He said the cause of all suffering comes from two poisons, wealth and women, 财 and 色 in Chinese, while the cause of all joys comes from precepts and meditation. So they're in contrast. Dao Xuan says that these two poisons have corrupted both Buddhists and non-Buddhists. He warned that many Buddhist masters attempt to make profits and fame from offering Dharma lectures. Interestingly, Dao Xuan's discussion on the corrupting power of wealth and women illustrates that his interpretation was localized in the Chinese tradition. So because his discussions mainly focus on Confucian value system, including like 5 virtues such as benevolence, righteousness, prosperity, wisdom, and fidelity. Those values for dealing with 5 core relationships in Chinese society: the ruler and the subjects, the master and the disciples, husband and wife, father and son, and friends. He argued that both wealth and women brought up sufferings to human beings and heavenly beings. Then in chapter 11 of his text, he focused on how the women could endanger the monastic community and corrupt the monks. He linked certainly women with desire, one of the 3 poisons in Buddhism. It's kind of like traditional Buddhist values. Then he attributed women as the cause of pollution to their biological structure. He offers a list of 10 evils of women, and he focused on women's roles mostly in traditional Chinese society rather than in monastic settings. He portrayed women as the origins of social conflicts and crises rather than the spiritual pollution in Buddhism and monasticism. I don't go to details, but you can read my paper in the future. And Dao Xuan basically discussed the social roles of women and their discontent. Like women appeared as daughters, sisters, wives, and mothers in worldly life. And he basically attributed the internal conflicts within the family to the biological body and mind in their numerous roles for women. And also it should be noted that the discourse of women's 10 evil deeds could be traced back to an earlier Buddhist text called the 佛说预言拟经, scripture spoken by the Buddha to the lady Yue. But Dao Xuan's version is different from these older texts. He focuses on various roles of women in family and society, not just women as a wife. Another significant value in Dao Xuan's guidance is humility. In chapter 9 of his text, he insists that monastic members hold intense humility without attacking each other, because he basically saw the danger of the internal conflict within the monastic community. So he tried to emphasize that humility was very important for unifying the monastic community. And he listed some principles for regulating the daily behaviors of monks. He also values being honest as a very crucial ethical principle in medieval Buddhist monasticism. In particular, he offers a list of examples for unacceptable behaviors of monks. Then we will take a look at Dao Xuan as a reformer of his new suggestions. Dao Xuan values concentration as a second meaningful learning for a newly ordained monk, following observing the precepts for cultivating morality. He approaches concentration as a learning method from a reformative perspective. In chapter 3 of his text, he highlights the significance of 5 contemplations of stopping minds, 五停观, and offers instructions on practicing them. Given that there were many versions of this meditation system available in Dao Xuan's era, So we should trace the development of this practice. But his version probably based on the meditative sutra of Dhammatala, Dhammadolo Chanjin, which was translated by Buddha Badala in the 5th century upon the request of Huaiyu. Basically, Dhammatala actually was a monk from Kashmir, and Buddha Badala likely studied this practice in Kashmir. When the Chinese monk Yuen traveled to Kashmir, he met Buddha Badala and invited him to China to teach this meditation. Yuen played a very important role in collaborating with the Central Asian monks to introduce some popular doctrines and practices to Central China. And Dao Xuan was very familiar with Yuen's life. He actually discussed Yuan and Huiguan, introduced this meditative practice in his continued biographies of eminent monks. So he probably favored this popular meditation in South China and valued it and tried to promote it in North China. Anyway, he offered a list of detailed steps of practicing 5 contemplative of stopping the minds in his writing. Dao Xuan also incorporates this practice into an extensive system of Mahayana cultivation centered on the 7 methods of skillful means, 七方便法. For him, the order of Buddhist training starts with studying monastic code, Vinaya, for 5 years before they move forward to study scriptures. But newly ordained monks should master the methods of 5 contemplations first, and then move on to attend the lectures on philosophical issues. As a Vinaya master and a key reformer of Buddhist monasticism, Dao Xuan strongly opposed textualism in learning Buddhism. Although Dao Xuan was erudite and accomplished scholarly Buddhist master, he insists that it's more critical for new monks to focus on daily practices rather than studying scriptural texts. He makes some very sharp criticisms on some of his contemporaries for their obscure interpretations on the scripture of adornment flower, Huaiyu. He accuses these scholars of chasing fame by writing extensive obscure commentaries on the Buddhist scriptures rather than concentrating on meaningful Buddhist learning. For Dao Xuan, though these masters produced massive commentaries, their minds were not engaged in this text at all. Besides applying Mahayana concepts to reintroduced so-called Hinayana practice, Dao Xuan also incorporated apocryphal Buddhist texts into his interpretations on Buddhist practices. For example, he borrowed some ideas from the Buddhist apocryphal text Ti Wei Po Lei Jin for explaining the concept of 6 difficulties in Buddhism. Basically, I suggest that Dao Xuan was very well aware of the popularity of this apocryphal text in his era. So he borrowed these ideas from this text in his new interpretation. He also pays special attention to the concept of Buddha nature. Dao Xuan states that all sentient beings have the same Buddha nature. Dao Xuan wrote, quote, traveling around the northern and the southern banks of the Yangtze River to seek enlightenment. The enlightenment was accompanying, yet were not well realized. Thinking enlightenment outside of oneself easily brought fatigue, while tranquil meditation at once place would promptly extinguish this fatigue. Suddenly one awaked and realized a little, then one realized enlightenment hidden within him. Quote end. This sudden awareness seemed to be very familiar with early Chan practitioners at some point. Now we go to conclusions. I will just briefly summarize my discussion here. I argue that Dao Xuan developed his unique reflexive understanding of the monastic crisis in his era. He tried to understand the challenges the Buddhist establishment faced from a perspective of insider. For him, the Buddhist monastic community desperately trained its monastic members in following the traditional order of 3 learning areas: morality, concentration, and wisdom. He regarded observing precepts as a starting point for the monastic career as a Buddhist monk. He also valued the importance of ritualized daily practice centered on purifying the mind. As an ambivalent scholarly monk, Dao Xuan's approach to resolving the problems of the monastic community were both reformative and conservative. On the one hand, he strongly supported some traditional Buddhist values and practices. On the other hand, he always introduced new resources from both Mahayana tradition and Chinese indigenous tradition to interpret some old practices. He attempted to reform the practices and the rules for reviving Buddhist monasticism by incorporating Buddhist Mahayana ideas into his new interpretation of traditional Buddhist practice. Dao Xuan also held a conservative position in traditional Buddhist values, such as monastic asceticism based on austerity, chastity, humanity, and honesty. In the meantime, he was also a reformist who mobilized all available resources to revive the practices that could enrich the traditional values. And his position was shaped by both internal and external challenges inside and outside of Buddhist monasticism. He attempted to reshape the Buddhist monasticism by responding to these challenges. And as a scholarly monk and institutional reformer, he valued practices rather than textual learning for teaching new monks traditional methods with new meanings. He targeted social relations by offering Buddhist solutions in ethics and morality. But he held a strong conservative position against women, which might be influenced by the social and the cultural atmosphere in his era. And he also introduced the ideas in popular apocryphal texts for reinterpreting new ideas to revive the monasticism in medieval China. Thank you for your attention.